I arrived just after noon, the heat curling off the cracked road in waves. The drive from the last town had been long and winding, the terrain turning from dry to lush as we climbed higher into the hills. When we pulled up to the village, it felt like stepping into a forgotten photograph, quiet, green, timeless. Women stood in front of doorways, barefoot, their saris catching the breeze like sails. Children peeked at me from behind clay walls. No men. Not one. Asterisk my guide, a young man from the city who'd been assigned to drop me off, leaned close before unloading my single bag from the jeep. "They'll want to talk to you," he said under his breath, eyes flicking toward a stone path that led between two trees. "All three of them. Asterisk 3, I asked, confused. "Asterisk, you'll see," gave a shrug that didn't explain anything. "This village. It's different. There are no men left here." Then he was gone. I stood there with my bag in one hand and the wind pressing against my shirt. The village had an old soul. I could feel it in the way the breeze hummed through the trees, in the creak of wooden doors and the distant clang of metal bowls. This was supposed to be a retreat, a sabbatical from the mess I'd left back home. I'd imagined quiet meditation, dusty temples, maybe a river. I hadn't expected to be the only man in an entire village. Asterisk, a young girl in braids came up to me and tugged at my sleeve without a word. She led me along a path past terraced fields and clotheslines heavy with saris. We stopped in front of a low, yellow house with a tiled roof and vines creeping up its side. She gestured for me to go in, then disappeared. Asterisk inside. The air was cooler. I stepped over the threshold and was hit with the scent of sandalwood and cardamom. 3 women were seated on the floor around a small woven mat, cups of tea before them. They turned toward me as if they'd been expecting me all day. Asterisk welcome, the one closest to me said. Her voice was low and calm. "I'm Priya." Asterisk the woman next to her nodded. "Meera." Asterisk the third, sitting a little apart and watching me with a mischievous tilt of her head, smiled. "Devika." Asterisk. They were all beautiful, in ways I didn't have words for. Not like models or movie stars, more like paintings that changed depending on where the light fell. Priya had a stillness that made you quiet just by looking at her. Meera looked tired in a poetic kind of way, like she carried things others couldn't see. Devika? She was the one who kept her eyes on me the longest. Her smile didn't leave her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes either. I felt like she could see something in me that even I hadn't figured out. Asterisk, sit Priya, said, and I obeyed. Asterisk, they poured me tea without asking. They didn't ask where I came from or why I was here. Instead, Priya said, "You'll stay here." With us? Asterisk, there was no room for argument in her tone. It wasn't cold, just settled, like they'd already made the decision before I'd arrived. I nodded. Asterisk, the sun slipped lower as we shared the quiet space. No television, no phones. Just the sound of wind against the shutters and the clinking of glass bangles whenever one of them moved. I tried not to stare, but there was something magnetic in the way they moved around each other. It's like a dance I wasn't part of yet. Asterisk later. They showed me to a small room with a window that overlooked a courtyard. The bed was firm, the sheets hand-stitched. As night fell, the sky turned indigo, and warm light filled the corners of the room. That's when I heard it laughter, not loud, not wild, just soft, shared and layered with lullabies. It came from outside the window, drifting up from the courtyard. I moved quietly and peeked through the half-open wooden shutter. Asterisk, there they were, all 3 of them, sitting cross-legged around a small lantern. Meera was humming a tune I didn't recognize, and Devika laughed into her hand while Priya passed. Something wrapped in cloth from one to the other. A doll, maybe. Or a photograph. Couldn't tell. Asterisk, they looked younger out there in the firelight. Not haunted, not careful, just free. Asterisk. I closed the window and lay back down on the bed. My heart was still. My thoughts for once weren't racing. Nice. But that sound, the sound of women laughing gently into the night, followed me into sleep like a song I used to know but had forgotten. In the mornings, the house smelled of ginger and ash, the scent of old wood fires and fresh chai. Would wake before the sun and sit by the window, listening to the village stretch awake. Roosters crowed somewhere in the distance, and soft footfalls passed by the walls, sandals brushing against dirt. Asterisk, the house wasn't large, but it had a kind of quiet dignity. High ceilings, wide windows framed with faded blue paint, walls lined with old black and white photographs, most of them featuring people I didn't recognize. But in every photo, at least one of the women was there, younger versions of Priya, Meera, or Devika, smiling softly or not smiling at all. It wasn't just their house. It was a history. I noticed it first on my third morning. The teacups. 3 of them. Always placed with care on the wooden table in the central room. Each cup different, one with chipped edges, another faded. With age, the third wrapped with a gold rim like someone had once thought it important. But never for asterisk, I never asked. It didn't feel right to ask. Instead, I waited each day as the 3 women moved around me like clock hands, brushing against the hour of something I couldn't name. There was a rhythm in their lives, a way they carried trays and peeled mangoes and swept the floor with such purpose that I felt foolish sitting still. Asterisk, so I began helping. Quietly washing vegetables, fetching water, sweeping the porch. I didn't ask for permission, just moved in step with them, like trying to join a dance halfway through the song. Asterisk Priya always spoke softly, even when she was giving instructions. Her words were precise, thoughtful. You can leave the herbs in the sun for 2 hours, not more. The bitterness comes later, she told me one afternoon, handing me a small basket of neem leaves. Asterisk Meera was harder to read. She painted sometimes out in the courtyard. Abstract shapes, muted colors, layered brush strokes that she wiped away just as often as she finished. She rarely looked me in the eye, but she always made sure I had clean towels folded at the end of my bed. A quiet tenderness, buried under silence. Asterisk Devika was different. She teased me about my accent, about how I sliced onions too thick. In America, do they teach you how to cook at all? She said once, laughing as she leaned over my shoulder to show me the right way to hold the knife. But sometimes her laughter would stop halfway through and leave behind something unspoken, a thought she wouldn't say aloud. Asterisk one evening during a lull in the heat, we sat together in the courtyard, each holding a glass of cool water. Fireflies blinked along the wall. Devika asked me, "Why did you come here?" Really, asterisk, I hesitated. I didn't know where else to go. Asterisk, they didn't press me further. But something shifted after that. Asterisk, the days became slower. Or maybe I was just noticing more. The way Priya always sat facing the door as if waiting. The way Meera never drank her tea all the way down, always leaving a sip untouched. And the way Devika's fingers trembled slightly when she was silent. For too long, asterisk one afternoon, I was setting the table, and I mistakenly reached for a 4th cup from the shelf. Devika saw me and stilled. Asterisk 3, she said simply, and took the 4th cup from my hand. She placed it back, then arranged the 3 cups herself. Perfect alignment, no explanation. Asterisk that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside on the porch, listening to the wind slide through the trees. The house was still. It's a kind of stillness that feels held in place, like it's waiting for something to break. Asterisk Meera came out without a sound. She sat beside me, pulling a shawl tighter over her shoulders. Asterisk, you miss your home? She asked. Asterisk? I shook my head. There's nothing left to miss. Asterisk, she looked at me then. Really looked. For a moment, the walls she held up like breath softened. Then, without warning, she reached for the empty cup I had placed beside me and took it from my hands. Asterisk, her fingers brushed mine. Warm, barely there. Asterisk. But she didn't let go. Asterisk for a few seconds. She just held the cup between us, her thumb resting on the lip of it. Our skins still touching. Asterisk. Then she rose, walked back inside, and closed the door behind her. Asterisk, I sat there, still feeling the outline of her touch in my hand, and stared at the cup she'd left behind, the fourth one, the one they never used. Asterisk and I began to wonder if the space they kept empty wasn't for someone who had left, but for someone they were waiting to arrive. The monsoon arrived without warning. Asterisk one morning, the skies just cracked open, and everything in the village slowed to a hush. Clothes clung to skin, the air grew thick, and the scent of wet earth filled every breath. I watched the water drip in steady trails from the edges of the tiled roof, forming quiet pools in the courtyard. Even the birds seemed quieter, as if listening. Asterisk inside. The house felt smaller, closer. The women moved more deliberately now, their routines softened by the rain. Priya spent hours near the window, reading from a tattered book in Sanskrit. Meera painted swirls of gray and blue onto old canvas, rainwater mixing with paint on her fingers. Devika sat on the floor, braiding flowers into strands of jute, humming to herself. Asterisk, I had been there long enough now to stop feeling like a guest. My presence no longer seemed to startle them. There was still something just beneath the surface, a kind of breath held in the walls. Asterisk one afternoon. The power flickered and vanished. The rain was heavy, drumming on the roof like thousands of small hands. Priya sat beside me with a candle lit between us. Her fingers cradled a small carved statue of Ganesha, thumb running along its worn edge. She didn't look at me when she spoke. Asterisk, you know why there are no men here, don't you? Asterisk, I shook my head. Asterisk, there was a conflict. Years ago, a border dispute. The men went to defend the land. Only the land remained. Asterisk, she placed the statue on the table gently, like it was made of glass. Her voice didn't crack, but I felt the heaviness in it. Asterisk, we decided not to wait anymore. Not for men who died or ones who'd never return. We decided to live differently. Asterisk later, Meera showed me a drawer filled with old letters, folded like fragile wings. Most were written in a different hand. Some bore military stamps, some smeared with water stains, others never opened. She ran her fingers across the top of the stack, then closed the drawer without taking one out. Asterisk that night. Over a shared dinner of lentils and rice, Devika laughed for the first time in days. Not the teasing kind, something softer, real. A drop of curry stained her wrist, and she dabbed it with her dupatta, glancing at me with eyes that didn't look away. You're quiet tonight, she said. I'm listening, I replied. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. I don't know when it happened, when each of them became more than their names. When Priya's voice started staying with me after she left the room. When Meera's silences began to feel like conversations. When Devika's laughter didn't echo, but rooted itself inside my chest. I didn't fall for them in the usual way. There was no first kiss, no electric moment, just a slow building like steam on glass. Asterisk the next evening, the rain came down harder than before. I stood on the porch watching it fall in silver sheets when I felt Devika step beside me. She didn't speak at first, just stood, letting her shoulder brush mine. Asterisk, you didn't come here to save yourself, she said after a while. Asterisk, I turned to her. What do you mean, Asterisk? She looked at me, really looked, like she had been watching me every day and had finally decided. I could be trusted with whatever she was about to say. Asterisk, you came for something else. You don't know it yet, but you did. Asterisk, I said nothing. I didn't know what to say, Asterisk. She stepped in front of me, pulling her damp shawl closer around her shoulders. Her face was calm, but her eyes flickered. Asterisk, if you stay, would you help us bring new life into this place? Asterisk, the rain was loud, but her voice cut through it, clear and steady. Asterisk, she didn't touch me, didn't smile. There was no seduction in her tone, no softness to disguise the gravity. Just the truth, placed carefully in front of me like one of Meera's unfinished paintings. Asterisk, not for pleasure, she continued. Not for love in the way you've known it, but for something else. For legacy, for us, for the house, for what's been waiting. Asterisk, I stared at her. My breath held. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. Asterisk, it wasn't desire in her eyes. It was need. Something deeper than flesh. Asterisk, I understood in that moment that they hadn't chosen this path out of fantasy. It was survival. It was a choice shaped by grief and defiance. And now, they were offering me a place in it, not as a man they wanted, but as one they had quietly hoped might come. Asterisk, I nodded. But the weight of the gesture sank through me like a stone in water. Because what they were asking wasn't just an act. It was a devotion, a vow. Asterisk, Devika gave the smallest of smiles. Then she turned and disappeared into the house, leaving me with the storm and the thunder of my own thoughts. The days blurred into one another after that night. Asterisk's rain came and went. The house dried slowly, like it was still holding the memory of the storm in its walls. The mud path to the well grew solid again, and the leaves on the trees stopped dripping. Life didn't return to normal, but to something else, something quieter, more deliberate. Like each moment had to be felt fully before we moved on to the next. Asterisk, I began waking earlier. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to hear the sound of their movements before the sun reached the windows. Devika's bangles would chime faintly. When she brushed past the curtain, Priya would light incense by the threshold. Meera would stand in the garden barefoot, her shawl barely hanging onto her shoulders. Asterisk, there were 3 rooms in the house, apart from mine. And over time, those walls began to blur. Some nights, Meera would knock on my door without saying a word and sit beside me in silence. Her hand wrapped around mine, both of us staring at the ceiling until her breathing softened. Other nights, Priya would leave a folded note on my pillow. Not with words, but with pressed flowers between the pages of an old book. She once tucked in a single line that read, "Not all homes have roofs. Some are built between hearts." Asterisk, Devika was different. She'd appear suddenly, her fingers stained with turmeric, and press something into my hands. A broken bead, a ripe fig, a poem scrawled on torn paper. Then she'd vanish as quickly as she came, her laughter echoing behind her. Asterisk, but there was nothing romantic in the traditional sense. It's no heat, no seduction. It's only care, only presence. We moved around each other like planets orbiting the same center. A rhythm we didn't speak of, but followed instinctively. Asterisk, one morning. Just after dawn, I found Meera crouched in the garden with a silver idol in her palms. The soil was damp, and her fingers were streaked with earth. She was whispering something I couldn't quite hear, something more felt than spoken. When she noticed me, she didn't flinch or hide. She simply turned her hand and showed me the small figure, a goddess. It's weathered but still serene. Asterisk, for protection, she said. Asterisk, we sat together in the dirt, the light breaking slowly through the trees. She placed the idol into the ground and covered it with care, like a seed she hoped would bloom. Asterisk, later that same day, Priya found me on the porch. She stood behind me for a long moment, then stepped forward and took my hand. She guided it gently toward her stomach, resting it flat just below her ribs. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Asterisk, her eyes met mine, and I saw everything there. Not fear, not excitement, just stillness. A calm surrender to the turning of the world. Asterisk, I held my hand there a moment longer, then let it fall. She turned and walked back inside, leaving the scent of jasmine and sunlight in her wake. Asterisk, Devika came to me that afternoon with a bowl of mangoes. She was humming, barefoot, her braid loose for once. She plucked a piece from the bowl and placed it between my lips before I could speak. It was sweet, bursting with warmth. Asterisk, you think too much, she teased, sitting beside me with her knees tucked under her chin. You're in your head all the time. Come out, be here. Asterisk, I laughed, finally, the first time in days. She tilted her head and smiled in approval. Asterisk, there you are. She said, asterisk, there was a peace to those days I hadn't known was possible. Not the kind you chase, but the kind that catches you when you're not looking. It was in the way Meera swept the floors in slow, deliberate strokes. In the way Priya folded the laundry with surgical precision. In the way Devika danced in the kitchen when she thought no one was watching. Asterisk, one morning. I sat in the center room with a cup of tea cooling in my hands. The house breathed around me. Asterisk, Pra was at the stove, her back to me, stirring something. Aromatic and rich. Asterisk, Meera, was on the veranda, painting with long, thoughtful strokes, her brush moving like it remembered each line before it touched the canvas. Devika was in the courtyard, scolding a baby goat that had escaped its pen, her laugh rising in bursts like bells. It was a still life. A moment so perfect I felt afraid to breathe too loudly, as if it might shatter the balance. I looked at each of them separately, completely, and I felt something click into place. I loved them, not with want or claim, not in the messy, possessive way I'd loved before. I loved them like the earth loves the sun, steady, from a distance, warmed without burning, and they loved me, in the way they let me in the way they let me witness them without performance, in the way they trusted me to be quiet, to stay, to be part of their world without trying to change it. I didn't know what we were building. I didn't know what would come next. But in that moment, 1 man, 3 women, a house older than any of us, and the sound of a goat bleating in the distance, I knew that something sacred had begun. Something wordless, something real. By the time the first chill touched the air, the seasons had begun to show on their bodies. The curves of change were unmistakable, a quiet, sacred unfolding. Priya wore looser shawls now, her hands often resting on her belly without realizing. Meera painted slower, but with more intention, as if each brushstroke marked a passing of time. And Devika hummed lullabies even when no one was nearby, swaying gently when she cooked. The village noticed, but no one spoke. There were glances, yes, not of judgment, but of acknowledgement. As if this too was part of the cycle they all silently accepted. The aunties at the well offered fruit with softer smiles. Ill children lingered longer by our house gates. An old woman pressed her hand to my shoulder one day and said simply, "Your roots are taking." I spent more time repairing things, fixing shutters, sealing cracks, reinforcing shelves. I needed to do something with my hands, not out of anxiety, but reverence. It felt like caring for the body of a living thing, this house that had carried them all for generations. One afternoon, while sweeping the porch, I noticed the table again. The same one that had always held 3 teacups. Its wood was warped from age, the surface scarred with use. I traced the familiar grooves where cups had left faint rings, and without thinking, I fetched my tools. I sanded down one end, smoothed the edges. Then, in a slow, careful arc, I carved a 4th indentation, a place for a new setting. Not a symbol, not a gesture, just a seat. A quiet acknowledgement that the old story had made room for the present. When Devika saw it later that day, she didn't say a word. She just touched the groove, ran her fingers along it once, and kissed my cheek before walking inside. That night, they placed a cup there for the first time. The days moved gently after that. Priya began collecting herbs for teas she said would help with strength and rest. Meera painted a mural on the back wall of the courtyard, a large tree, its roots tangled with small hands reaching up through the soil. Devika spoke to the growing life inside her as if it were already in the room, cracking jokes and blowing kisses into the folds of her sari. I felt them changing. Somehow, without noticing it happen, I changed too. I stopped thinking about the life I had left, the job, the cities, the ache of always looking for more. This place was not the end of something. It was the beginning, or maybe something that had always been waiting for me to arrive. One night. The sky turned golden before settling into dark, and we gathered around the fire in the courtyard. The breeze was cool and steady, rustling the banana leaves above us. The scent of sandalwood curled through the air. Meera leaned her head on my left shoulder. Devika rested her head on my thigh, humming some tune with no name. Priya sat just beside me, her fingers laced with mine, her breathing even and sure. None of us spoke. The fire popped softly. Crickets sang in the distance, and overhead the stars flickered like old promises being remembered. It occurred to me then, I had never asked what the future looked like. I didn't need to. We weren't chasing futures here. We were living in moments. Asterisk, they didn't belong to me. Not in the way I had once thought love should be. They weren't mine to keep or control, but they were with me. They had chosen me, and I had chosen to stay, to witness, to carry what I could. Asterisk, I glanced at the house behind us glowing warm in the firelight, and then at the table with 4 cups, now waiting for morning. Asterisk, I felt a stirring, not fear, not pride, just a kind of still, heavy joy. Asterisk, soon there would be cries in the night. Small hands, new names, sleepless hours, and first steps. But tonight there was just this warmth, shared silence. The weight of 3 lives curled into mine. Asterisk fireflies began to gather along the porch beams, blinking in slow golden pulses. I watched them float, weightless. As the fire faded down to glowing coals, asterisk, and in that quiet, I let the truth settle in my chest like a stone finding the bottom of a well. Asterisk. I didn't give them anything they didn't already have. Asterisk, I just stayed. I just loved them, and maybe that was enough. Asterisk.